speakers. I didn't do it for mine. This is Juana Maria with Illinois WorkNet, and we're just going to do a quick sound check before we get started. And we really want to welcome you to the Job Search Tools webinar. If we can do a quick sound check, you can do it in two ways. As you notice, we have an upgrade on our Adobe Connect for those of you that are regulars, and I see a lot of people on here that have been a part of our usual webinar sessions. And up at the top, you have a little guy. This is in the top center of your screen, and you'll notice that you can go ahead and click and select your status. So go ahead and raise your hand if you can hear me properly. Or you can do a agree, disagree, so thumbs up or thumbs down. Sounds like everybody can hear us. Very good. Nothing like technical difficulties to ruin a webinar, right? So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I see that everyone's participated. We're going to go through some housekeeping items and then get straight away to the webinar. We have a lot to cover. So one, I'd like to point out the chat pod for everyone that has joined us via the computer broadcast, and this is your way to interact with us and communicate so that we know what you'd like us to focus on. If we're going through some of this information and you want more information on a certain topic that Laura will cover, go ahead and shoot it in there. I issues downloading all this information. So go ahead and just select the file name as we've mentioned above, and you can go ahead and just save it to your desktop. That information has also been emailed to you as part of your reminder, and we'll do a follow-up email with that. Underneath, you'll notice a couple of polling pods. Go ahead and fill that in for us. I know that a couple people have filled out the bottom one. If you can go ahead and just take another minute and fill that information out. And that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and you'll notice your conference call number that you can go ahead and jot down. If you have any technical difficulties and you're listening via broadcast, you can call that number and listen in via the conference call number. Now, we're going to go ahead and have everyone muted on the conference call until we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar, and then we'll put you on an open floor request where you can ask questions for those on the phone. So without further ado, I am very excited to introduce Laura Smith-Prue. She is has a very incredible background. Screen so she can get started. And if you want to give everyone a hello from Denver, I think, right? Now we don't have to be jealous of your weather because we're just as warm in Chicago, and all of Illinois is having some awesome weather. So go ahead and hand it over to you, Laura.
Thank you, and I'm really pleased to be here, and I have to say, you do not need to be jealous of my weather at all. It is snowing today.
Oh, my goodness.
And I am not kidding.
Well, then you're jealous of our weather.
We'll definitely be glad when it's over, but you usually have a nicer spring than we do. And I have lived in Illinois in the past, so I do know that for a fact. But welcome, everybody. Definitely wanted to give you a bit of background on what I do and how I've come to this point, I guess. Basically, I've had a fascination with resumes long before I ever launched my own business, and found that when people would bring me something that they said was not working and was not getting them a job, that I was very eager to take it from them and redo it. And I have done that for more than 20 years, finally launched my own practice at the urging of some of the people who benefited from that. And I've had I have had the chance to do a lot of things, which you can certainly read about on my website as well. So without too much excess talk about that. I'd like to launch in here and definitely talk about what we're going to cover. We do have a lot of ground to go over. Basically, when it comes to resumes themselves, they have changed so much. There are different things that you need to be aware of in terms of resume effectiveness, what is going to be the critical sections to use, critical strategies to use, and I'm a big fan of strategy. We'll also talk about what today's resumes really don't need to have on them, you know, what's missing from some people's standpoint. There's reasons behind creating what I call a targeted resume, definitely strategies for addressing challenges, and we'll get into what those are here specifically in a while as well. There's some good ways to road test a resume, make sure that it's on the right path for you and for your clients, and then get a resume ready to go through an applicant tracking system. In terms of the resume being a marketing tool, what I've seen for quite a long document that there's a lot of theories out there in terms of what can be done, why it should be done. The bottom line is that there is so much competition that for anybody who's sending out a resume at this point in time, they really need to adopt these trends. Failing to distinguish yourself from people that are in the same field and people who do the same thing as you is probably the biggest hurdle for most people. In terms of what works today, the speed at which information is presented is critical. Definitely the top part of the resume, which we'll talk about here in a minute, is a key piece. Resumes have changed so fast, and I say here that in my opinion, there's been changes that are very expedient over the last decade. I literally would tell you that resumes change every 6 months, and they do. In my industry, we track what's effective. We also hold a global competition, and what is presented in that competition would probably blow your mind. Have access to, some type of desktop publishing, versus the typewriter we all used to be doing our resumes on. The fact that everyone can send out a resume at a good clip to somebody who is advertising for a particular job candidate means that the competition is just so stiff. It is absolutely critical to stand out. One of the biggest pieces of resume strategy in my mind is what I call real estate, meaning if you have something very interesting to present and it's not in the top 1/3 to 1/2 of the first page, you can forget about anybody noticing it. Even if someone elects to interview you, you're going to see that they are tracing their finger down that second page as you're sitting in front of them, and they really haven't noticed anything specific that is delineated on there other than maybe the basics of your job history and your education. So a lot of the samples that I employ slides is the one that is called Sales Professional. And this one is a great example of a lot of different types of resume challenges. We'll certainly refer to it as we're going through and discussing what some of these different components look like and how these strategies will help. So a resume title is something I definitely wanted to talk to here. Resumes don't really contain objectives anymore. What we used to say was, I'm seeking a sales position and it, needs to have this or that component in it. By now, you want to just take that information and make it into a title. And when I say a title, the title is really an objective and a goal all built in at the same time. It's very obvious to the reader. It doesn't take up any excess space, and it quickly focuses them on what you're trying to do. The sales rep, as we see here, is a classic example. The branding tagline is another piece that has emerged in recent years. You probably have seen resumes that have very, very long summaries. The summary itself being something about this candidate that is reflecting their strengths, what they naturally do that distinguishes them. It is a really good idea to put it into a branding tagline. And you will definitely see these taglines throughout other samples that I provided. This one is a little bit long, and the fact that it has a little trouble fitting on this slide is probably a good indication. It doesn't necessarily have to be lengthy to make a point. It just needs to be fairly succinct, and again, eye-catching. The keyword list is something that I always recommend for someone who's a novice at writing a resume, just because it's going to help that human reader see what is this person really good at. It's obviously going to help with those applicant tracking systems that pick up keyword information. When it comes to keywords, though, you do need to be a little bit careful. You want to make sure that they're fairly targeted to the role, that they're not entirely redundant. I mean, on this particular resume, we have enough information about prospecting and different ways that this person has had experiencing account penetration. We don't have to say every particular word. You can add them in a list as you're ATS systems in particular are very fussy about that. They will count keyword incidents, they will count the frequency, and they will definitely pay attention to how they're used in context. And there is a link to an article here where I was interviewed by CareerBuilder on keywords specifically, because I know that that's still a mystery for a lot of people. One other piece I do want to talk about here in terms of resume trends are testimonials. Any kind of an accolade, a letter of reference, a great paragraph in a performance review, those are substantiating what you could be saying about yourself or what this candidate is saying about themselves in the rest of the resume. And the important piece there is that not so much that we need to know who these people are that have said something in particular, but what title they have, whether or not what they have said is backing up this brand message that the person has already put out there. The achievements list in the highlights is definitely a piece I wanted to touch on here a bit. You will see this as a commonality throughout most of the resumes that you're looking at here. The great thing about using some type of list of these are the high points of my career is you can pull in something that might be a little bit older, that this person is not a current sales representative. She used to be one. She actually is in the real estate field at the moment that we wrote this resume, and you will see that if you read through, there's not a ton of emphasis on what she's doing right now, but her past included sales management and marketing positions that are very critical to the job she's seeking. She was very successful with this. So again, keep in mind that the achievement section is something that is a great strategy piece. The resume headings are another thing to pay attention to. Definitely when it comes to your work history, you're probably not going to put anything too exciting there, but your highlight section can be named anything you want. In the case of this particular salesperson, this is, again, reiterating her experience and her competency in the sales field. You will also see on one of the other resumes, the one that is called sabbatical, that we talk about selected operational and revenue results. And again, good reminder for the reader of what this person's about and the skills that they're trying to continue to use. email later a list of power verbs that I intended to have a link on here for. Power verbs really give the reader some other information to look at. You know, if we start writing things like I'm responsible for this and I perform that, it's just not very engaging. It doesn't get somebody interested in what you do, and it actually tires the reader out to read that over and over. So you will see specifically that in the professional resume industry, we have a standard where you actually begin every achievement sentence with a different verb if possible. So you will see a lot of examples of that on these particular samples. Color is something that is becoming a very hot resume trend at the moment. Given that most of what we're going to see is an electronic copy, we're not necessarily looking for color on an actual page. We're looking for color that pops in certain areas of the resume, maybe sets off a particular part of the text. Even though I think I have a blue on most of these, you'd be surprised at how many resumes where a little bit of taupe, a little bit of red, actually makes the information stand out. The thing about color in terms of this kind of trend is you want to be very careful with it. You definitely do not want every other heading or every other sentence to be in color. It's a touch of it, and it's intended to set off interesting information. Metrics is something I also wanted to emphasize. Probably one of the biggest errors I see when someone is a novice at resume writing is that they haven't quantified anything about their work, meaning that the employer really wants to see some proof of performance. You're going to give them ideas of the scope of what you're able to handle. One of the better examples I can think of in terms of that would be working with a project manager many years ago who told me that she had not worked with teams that were very large, and when I asked her what she meant, she said they were anywhere from 50 to 300 people. And I don't know about you, but to me that is very large. Scope is going to matter to the employer, and it's going to qualify that person at a different level. It's important to think about how can I get enough figures into this resume? What are some of the ways that I can get information in there that the employer is going to understand? And it does not have to just be results. That's another important point. It can be the scope of what you've done in terms of the money associated with it, the budgets. It can definitely be improvements that the person might have been behind or been instrumental in making. It can obviously, on a sales resume, it can be revenue. It can be any type of payback on a particular project. The size and scope of an installation sometimes is interesting because, again, if you've got an applicant who is working at a multi-location facility with thousands of employees, their job is a lot more challenging, and that's something to point out to the employer. Definitely cost savings whenever you can make or save somebody money. That should be first and foremost in the resume. Right about now, if someone's working for, say, a telecommunications company and they've had rampant growth, that's going to be very relevant to somebody who wants to grow their business. By the same token, if this person is doing their job despite business dropping off, that can also be of interest. Definitely, as I mentioned before, the size of teams managed is critical. There are people who are working in some type of service role, and they don't think to say, well, I handle, my share of 10,000 calls per month, say, in a call center. So volume is important as well. I have written an article on this subject, and it talks about how to go through what I would term a self-analysis, pull out dollar-driven types of metrics, get them embedded in the resume, and have them make sense. Now, in terms of what doesn't go on a resume these days, some of these are not necessarily going to be surprises. in terms of the objectives and salary history and things like that, the reason for the human resource manager up to a discrimination lawsuit if they either hire the person and like the photo and therefore have passed over someone else, or conversely did not like the photo, realized that this person was of a different ethnic background and passed them over. So those resumes end up in the trash. The exception to this, of course, is if there were an applicant looking in the European market where photos are common. References definitely don't have any place in a resume, and you may as well not take up any kind of real estate with references available upon request, because of course they are. Third person comes across a bit, what I will say, pompous, for lack of a better way to put it. You're best off writing about yourself in what I would call implied first person. You know, I lead project teams, take off I, put on lead, you know, that type of thing. And you will see that type of writing style throughout these resumes. The whole point that I would like to make about focusing a resume here is critical. If you have great skills that could potentially fit more than one particular job type, it's important to consider that the employers who are reading it don't know what you mean if your resume says resume versions, because the keywords behind them, what would be in your highlight section, would be distinctly different. If you're trying to figure out how you decide whether or not you should be splitting it off, you want to consider splitting it if the audience is going to be different. You know, if I'm a sales manager, I only want to see that you are generating revenue. I don't probably care that you're great at web development, for example. If you go online and do some research into job postings, you will see that the job of sales rep versus, say, web developer would be substantially different, so the keywords and the content are going to be different. In terms of where I recommend searching, Indeed.com is one of the better sites for this because it is not a job board, it is an aggregator. An aggregator pulls in results from other job boards and gives you a good way of searching by keyword, searching by title. You don't have to limit it. You can look at the qualifications behind each particular job type to see if it merits a job that often requires a federal resume style that is a very specific type of resume writing. It is actually done by professionals in my field that are certified in it, and you can use an internet search to find somebody who's either an authority on that, or you can find a book on the subject. The types of jobs that are a bit more what I would call cut and dried, scientist jobs, medical jobs, they will ask for a curriculum vitae. Curriculum vitae is basically much more of a straightforward list of here's what I've done, here's my education. There's really not much marketing put into a CV, and if you ever look up an example of a curriculum vitae, you'll see that it's a lot more dry, a lot easier to write, basically. So in going through the information on dealing with what I would call resume challenges, lack of a degree is very, very common. In fact, I would say probably a third of the people I talk to, granted most of them are at the executive level, did not finish a degree, didn't start it. You know, the fact is that honestly they have not only a lot of good company, so it makes sense for you to reassure them here, but you definitely want to tell them that it's more based on resume where you can see at the end that she is a candidate for this Bachelor of Science degree. If someone really hasn't taken any college, not even a semester of it, you can list professional training if you think it's relevant. If there really isn't anything past high school, I would definitely skip the whole education section altogether, because listing high school is not a good idea unless the applicant's very young. In terms of switching industries, this is something that comes up quite a bit too. You want to make sure that there's enough, what I would call conversion of the lingo, that it makes sense to the person who's reading. This sales rep, again, is a good example of this, because if we used lingo that was prevalent in her current job, we'd be talking about selling houses, we'd be talking about residential development, all types of things that really are not going to matter to an employer that is hiring more of a business-to-business sales rep. So if you look at this, you'll see that there's a lot of conversion of what I would call the classic real estate terms for that reason. In terms of changing careers, this is definitely something where a person can be using volunteer experience. If you take a look at the career change resume as an example, this is a hotel executive that had worked his way up for many years. Leadership positions within the nonprofits. And so we included some verbiage in here about why he was interested. You notice the career target title at the top. What that really means is, no, I've never been a nonprofit development director, but I know I can pursue it. That's the big difference versus someone who can say, I've been a sales rep, as in the previous example. That would be the huge difference in terms of using a career target title. Similar, again, a bit to an objective. Separating military, which I don't really have an example of, again, you want to find a lot of related skills to what this person is planning on pursuing. Career target titles are helpful here too, but pulling out military lingo is critical. Combat and weapons and things like that are just, they're not going to resonate with that audience. So as much as you can possibly convert terminology to fit what that person is pursuing, it's important. I will say that as an aside, in terms of separating military, that oftentimes the performance reviews are very, very helpful in going through and pulling out their metrics and things like that from their past experience. For a long time, and now they want to get back into what they've done before. The tricky thing here is that not all volunteer experience or part-time work experience should be included. Sometimes it's been something where you can list it, you can show it as a placeholder as it's done in terms of this particular sample. You're seeing that this person volunteered at the middle school, and she did it pretty heavily. But it's not worth really fleshing out in a lot of detail, yet she did have some financial type of role as well that was part-time. And her real first love was that asset management role in commercial real estate. So as you're seeing here, the highlights section for her talked much more about her previous experience. Very classic strategy for somebody like that, and she was able to get back into the field with this, with the keywords and everything slanted towards what she's pursuing. Basically, when it comes to strategies like this, it makes a lot more sense to focus on what the person does have than on what they're lacking. Explaining any type of return in work history type situations. For a lot of people that have been laid off in the past few years, this is really going to be a no-brainer. You just don't even bother listing it. if their job ended in 2010, it's not going to be too much of a surprise to most people. In terms of the gap itself, you want to give it a name if it's going to be very specific. The example that I have in here, what I call sabbatical, this person actually had treatment for cancer during the time that he was out. Now, again, this is not something to point out on a resume. It's definitely not something to point out on a cover letter as well. It's just really not going to cement that person's brand in someone's mind, in any way that is going to be helpful and get them into the next job. So as you see here, this person did actually have some particular type of consulting experience, and he planned ahead to take time off because he knew he was going to need cancer treatment, so we just left it very short and sweet, to the point, went back into his work experience and drilled through from there. So again, you want to be naming a gap. You want to allude to it if it's significant, but do not dwell on it. In terms of age bias, and this is something I wouldn't necessarily call it outdated, but it extends back probably beyond their peers. This becomes really obvious when a person is in a technology field, which is why we have this age discrimination example. The older experience becomes not only less relevant to employers, but as you see, there's not even a lot of space to describe it because tech experience can be so complex. If you're getting back to the 10 to 15-year mark, it's time to start summarizing up. Skip the dates. You don't necessarily need to have anything that says, well, this is, this job's from 1978 or what have you. Make sure that if there is something relevant about the experience that you maybe put a line or two under each job, it does not have to be fleshed out in detail, especially if the front of the resume is very heavy, accomplishment rich.
Hey, Laura, we have a question here that I think is really good with this. What do you do if you worked a couple of temp jobs? So you have this string of experience because of the economy.
Right. Honestly, I would group those together, and I would call them probably, say office work engagements or something like that, and then describe in perhaps a bullet point
that obviously do the job, but maybe call it something else somewhere else.
Well, they definitely need to be looking at what I would call the job descriptions for what they're wanting to do and pulling in keywords that they could consider to be equivalent knowledge. And instead of calling that keyword section something like competency, you could call it relevant business knowledge. Obviously, as you're saying, a lot of what they bring to the table is going to be transferable, but you really need to look at a lot of job descriptions to see what the employer calls it. That's really critical as we're trying to speak in the employer's language.
That's a great point. Thank you so much.
In terms of road testing a resume, and this is the piece that a lot of people don't really think about because they're not sure what to do after they've written it. You're so close to it, you might have tweaked it, and now what am I going to do? Definitely, it needs to be proofread for intent, meaning that your words can be spelled correctly, but they're not necessarily going to mean what you want them to. You need to read it backward for spelling errors, which is an old trick. But don't be afraid to have someone else. This person is looking. A lot of times a colleague can say, well, remember when you worked on that huge project? What about your role in this particular, type of department effort, or the fact that you're always the person we go to for, this particular kind of task. So friends can also proofread. You want to hand it to someone and say, If you didn't know anything about what I do, would you be able to figure it out from reading this? And even a spouse should be able to say, well, this is clear, or there's something missing here, that kind of thing. If possible, if you have access to a recruiter, those are great resources for feedback. They will definitely tell you what they think. They will definitely tell you if you've hit the mark. Let's see. In terms of converting a resume for what I would call the applicant tracking systems, a lot of times when you go to apply online, you're going to see paste resume here. If you paste the resume, it's going to word wrap. It's not necessarily going to make any sense in terms of what somebody else sees, and it might be garbled. You might find that some of the characters are not converting properly. So when if you're going to be applying online on a regular basis, I do recommend converting into plain text. If you do this ahead of time and you just happen to have this version ready, then it's a good way to have something that you can be pasting in. Essentially, in terms of conversion steps, and I'm not going to go into these in a lot of detail, you want to be saving as a .txt file, getting in, taking a look at what it looks like, adding some white space, converting characters. If you see something converted to a question mark, which is really common, make it a dash or whatever. When you get it done and you're happy with it, send it in an email to yourself. Paste it in as an email, and then you'll see what that employer would see on the other side. So basically, in terms of we might take some of these questions here and there as we go on. So we'll move on to the LinkedIn piece. Definitely one of my favorites. LinkedIn for job search is a subject that we could probably spend most of the day on. It's become such a hotbed of activity, and it is a great hub for anybody who's looking or wants to maintain a professional presence in terms of the concepts that we'll go over as far as LinkedIn. There's definitely some key pieces to talk about here. Certainly a lot of people will ask me, well, why should I join LinkedIn? Isn't it just like Twitter? No, it's not, but we're going to go over that. If you're going to create a profile, there are certain things that you're going to help yourself by knowing, finding employer contacts, using the site to its best, maximizing it, I guess I would say, promoting yourself and then staying current on it is not only a really good idea, it's almost a must at this point. When it comes to joining LinkedIn, the question that I run into here and there is, I've never really needed this. Why should I get on it now? Well, you'd be a little late to the party. There's actually closer to 100 million registered users at this point, but some of them are orphan profiles, so it's really tough for anybody to count them. It is the hub for recruiting activity because it's cheaper. It allows recruiters to use the site as a free resume database. They can see where you went to school and see what you're good at, and if you've populated your profile carefully enough, they will actually be able to find you pretty easily. There's a lot of forums, a lot of networking activity going on, and you would definitely want to leverage that. One point I do want to make is it's not just about being found, it's also a digital identity tool. You can plan on being Googled practically in no matter what be able to figure out something about who you are and what you do and that type of thing. Definitely I would not confuse LinkedIn with other social networking sites. Twitter, Facebook have that intensely personal aspect to them, And that is not the case on LinkedIn at all. You want to be very professional. Other professionals can be looking for you and reaching out to you as well. I do have a note on here about knowing the sections of a LinkedIn profile, and this is very important because when most people create a profile, LinkedIn has this very basic interface that lets you sign up, walks you through, has you add your work history, your education, and a couple of other notes. And what most people do is get on LinkedIn, add a few pieces of information, look around, and say, well, it's not doing anything for me. They probably didn't populate enough of it to help, and they're not leveraging it. So the headline specifically is very critical in terms of search engine optimization. We'll talk about that. The starred sections that I have on here are the ones you definitely want to focus on because they are at a minimum the kind of information someone would look for, and they also are very critical to LinkedIn's internal search. You know, and when I talk about search, I'm referring to logging in as a recruiter and saying, how do I find a great project manager in this particular geography? How do I find somebody that would actually be, a good candidate for me to recruit, and how can I see where they went to school and all these other details? So we'll go through this in some detail.
Hey, Laura, what would you say to this question from Luis, saying that he's not on LinkedIn because employers may use this as a way to discriminate against individuals? Being a recruiter, what would you say to that and on how valid they
being on it? If you're absent from it, people wonder if you've kept up on your professional career. When it comes to the photo, unless there is something you are definitely trying to avoid revealing about yourself, and I can't imagine what it would be, there are actually recruiters and hiring managers that will not contact you without a photo. I know it's backwards. We have this discussion all the time. But it is considered to be the equivalent of being at a networking party and not speaking to anybody. So very critical to be on there. In terms of bias, the only bias you're going to see at this point is if you're not on LinkedIn, to be honest with you. It is that overrun with hiring activity. So I would urge anybody who's thinking that it's going to be to their disadvantage to do some reading up on it, because you're missing out on a huge job tool. It's bigger than your resume. The photo request is definitely legal. There are a few people in HR that just automatically mask your photo when they look at it because they're concerned about the whole discrimination piece. As far as it's definitely something you'll want to do some reading on. You'll find that, again, if you're not already on here and leveraging this, you're going to be missing out on a massive amount of advantage in a job search. So, and definitely, as you're saying here, take a nice photo, have someone round you up with a digital camera. So in terms of the profile itself, I do have information in here on how to create it, because it is critical that after LinkedIn has rushed you through and had you populate sections of the profile, you want to make sure that you're getting enough information in here to have it make sense for you, have it work for you even when you're not looking. There are certain parts of LinkedIn that are critical for its internal search engine. If you think of LinkedIn as a mini Google, and you go into LinkedIn and you want to go look for somebody that maybe could even help you in your work, and you is a huge area that is missed by a lot of people. You can add keywords. You can certainly add a lot of information on your work experience. I don't recommend writing the information identical to a resume because here you are writing for the web. It needs to be short, needs to be snappy, needs to definitely make sense to somebody who finds you and be easily readable. The LinkedIn headline, which we'll talk about here in a minute, is something that that will come up right underneath your name. You are allowed to populate it. It's very, very prominent because when someone sees you in any kind of activity on LinkedIn, it's immediately displayed underneath your name, which we'll show in here in a minute. You have the opportunity to tune it. You definitely want to make sure that you have taken that opportunity because whatever job title you have, and especially if your job title is not what you think is relevant to what someone else might either search for or be tuned into, you want to have the opportunity to change it. In terms of getting the headline tuned for yourself, that is critical. There are 120 characters to be used, and I recommend using all of them. What a lot of people have done that join LinkedIn that are unemployed, and somehow this has become pervasive, they will use that headline and fill it in and say that they're unemployed and looking. And given that this really tells the audience nothing about you and why you're good at what you do, I don't recommend it. So we'll talk here a little bit about how to set up a headline, and again, visualize this under someone's name. Now here's somebody that's a project manager. This is a good example. They're putting keywords in the headline. If I'm looking for a Six Sigma black belt, this is going to come out very prominently. If I'm looking for someone PMP certified, again, very prominent. If I want to find someone in manufacturing, that's going to be very helpful. Here's another example. This is somebody that's has a particular type of technical expertise in SAP. You can put what I would call a bit of a branding message in there too, but keep in mind that people don't search for branding messages. Some of the more, I would call this an ineffective example, is when you put something like experienced project manager. Well, of course you're experienced, and you just told me nothing. You just told me that you work for such and such company. By the way, on LinkedIn, that is a default view. I can already see where you work. A negative LinkedIn headline is where you say, here I am, and I'm laid off and looking. So, definitely some examples here, and we'll go into this a bit when we go through Clay's example online. You can read a lot more about the subject of LinkedIn headlines at this link. It is an article that I've authored. I write for a job portal called jobhunt.org, and there are several of us actually that write on the topic of social media job search, but LinkedIn specifically is in my area, and I'm a huge fan of getting that headline tuned in a way that works for you. Your LinkedIn summary, and again, this is a piece we will look at here in a moment. It is one of the first pieces of information you can populate. It allows 2,000 characters. It is very short. 2,000 characters is, I'm going to say, maybe 200, 300 words, depending upon how you've used it. You want to make sure you use as much of this area as possible. If you take a resume summary and pop it in there, it's going to be too dry. And again, we're writing for the web. We want short sentences. We want something here that looks a bit more personal. You're on social media after all. You want to tell the reader who's looking at this why you're good at what you do, introduce yourself, use some keywords. There's a couple of other sections to do this in. Definitely the white space is critical. What I see is probably a huge LinkedIn sin is where people take a paragraph, dump it in there, and then they think they're done. It's not only hard to read, it's a text interface, and it looks very plain. There's no way to add color. There's no way to add lines and things like that. So here is an example of the beginning part of a LinkedIn summary. Would have more verbiage behind it, but the person is including some white space in here, and they're giving some, it's not even bullet points because you can't do that in LinkedIn, not without a lot of aggravation, and it's giving some very metric-driven and keyword-driven type of information. What I would call a not-so-great version is where you have this mumbling paragraph here. It says, you know, strong professional history, blah, blah, blah. And I pulled this out of an actual profile. So believe me, you will see that a lot. Don't copy it. In terms of your work history, LinkedIn has spaces for each job. I recommend that you do pretty much the same thing you would do in a resume in terms of getting the same kind of information in here, but you are limited on characters, and you have to be brief. And, you know, again, you're wanting to leverage what I would call the search capability of LinkedIn. Your job titles are critical. If you have a particular job title that isn't very meaningful, and I have the example here, business specialist, it really tells nobody anything, but you know that you're a project coordinator in real life, then add it behind your job title so it makes its way into the same field on LinkedIn. Extra white space is critical. Again, you dump a big paragraph in here, it's painful to read online. If someone has shown their education in a certain way on their resume, they were smart enough to take the date off of it because they graduated in 1978, they turn around and put it on LinkedIn. Well, now as a recruiter, I know your age, and yes, age bias is alive and well. I don't recommend doing this. You want to treat it the same way as you would on the resume. There is what's called a skills section, and I will see if I can show this to you here. If I miss it for some reason, somebody prompt me, but we will go through and look at that briefly. It's a way to add a list of keywords. It's in beta, and one thing you will see about our friends at LinkedIn is they have a lot of things in beta right now. They are intending to potentially go through an IPO process, and so therefore they have released features at a very good clip. You will find that there's a lot of new features being added constantly, and so we'll talk about that one. It's been out there for about 6 months, but still definitely in beta. In terms of skills themselves, you have a way of giving the reader some way to see how expert you are in a particular area, and we'll look at that briefly as well. One of the newer behind the curve. So, in terms of creating the profile, one thing that you will see very prominently if you've surfed LinkedIn at all is that people can be what's called recommended. They can be endorsed. There's different ways to go about either doing this for someone else or asking someone else for it. And definitely you would want to make sure that in terms of the recommendations, you are gathering some from colleagues if possible. I do recommend this even if you're not in a job search, because you want to show that you're very well respected, that your work is highly thought of. You will see that there are people who've gathered 50 and 60 and 70 recommendations. It is just very, very prevalent. Just looking over one of the questions here. Being unfamiliar with LinkedIn, way to have an account. No, you cannot help other people out and not include your own personal information. You do have to log in as someone else if you're trying to update their on LinkedIn. One huge aspect of what you want to be aware of on LinkedIn is that the site is really intended to connect you to as many other people as possible and connect you to people that are going to be able to help you out in your job search, perhaps be a great job-seeking resource to you. When you join what's called groups on here, they are set up by every type of interest from a professional standpoint that you could imagine. They're set up by industry, set up by level, definitely, where you went to school, your alma mater will be out there. You want to make sure that you're joining these because someone who's trying to get in contact with you, LinkedIn tries to make them pay for an upgraded version if they run out of invitations. And basically, you're making it easier for them to contact you because they can do it for free through the groups. In terms of the contact settings, this is where things get a little sticky on LinkedIn. You do want to include information on how you want to be contacted on LinkedIn. There are different boxes. Yes. If you don't, then when someone tries to contact you, they get a note that says, Bob is not open to receiving any contacts or connections, and then why are you on the site? You want to be open and, connecting with other people, sharing information with them. You can add an email address. You can add a phone number. You want to be careful to keep it out of very public areas like the headline because LinkedIn will kick you off of their site for doing that. You can check different boxes. I'm interested in consulting offers, or I'm interested in business offers. You have to be careful with that because if your employer looks at it and says, I see that it looks like you're open to career opportunities, you may have some explaining to do, and it is public. There is also a box called What Advice Would You Give to Users Considering Contacting You, and you can add a very large paragraph in there, which I know because I've done it. So, in terms of maximizing LinkedIn, this is where a lot of people get confused. This isn't Facebook. You're not being judged by the company you just got out of jail or what have you, not to connect with that person. I would definitely do it. You will grow your network. You will put yourself closer to other connections. And what LinkedIn does is show you this person is 2 degrees of separation away from you or 3 degrees. Everybody outside that you have no connection to. When you log in, it will also tell you, hey, you could potentially connect to 500,000 people. I'm not saying that you have to do that. It's just that you're making it easier for anybody who is looking for you or who has something to add for you professionally that you want to make sure that they have access to you. There is a facility on here called Who's Viewed My Profile. Very, very handy. And it will tell you actually who has tried to look at your profile. You do actually want to look at that once in a while. And the reason for that is that you'll be able to see something about what that particular audience is. If you are getting very ambitious about LinkedIn and you decide but with a free profile, you're going to at least get the minimum information. You might see that your colleagues are in there looking at your profile. It can be very telling. If you see recruiters in there looking at your profile and you're job seeking, that's great. So it can be kind of fun, actually, to take a look at. You want to keep contact settings open, be out there, be available to others. You can follow companies as well that you find interesting. And what happens when you do that is you will get announcements from LinkedIn that say, Accenture has just opened up 12 new job opportunities today, and they can be helpful. You'll definitely see things that could intrigue you. One other piece that we will go through on here is you want to be able to search for other people on LinkedIn, and we'll talk about why that is here in a minute. There's an advanced search feature on here that I could spend all day on. It's fascinating. In terms of finding employer contacts, this is critical for somebody who's in the middle of a job search and who's not getting traction. Say that somebody is a great customer service rep and they're sending out resume after resume and they're really not making any headway. If you get into LinkedIn and figure out that, okay, probably the person who's going to hire me is going to be a customer service manager, let's figure out who's a customer service manager in this particular geography or in this particular company. So first identifying who you're trying to go after is critical. The advanced search, which we'll look at here online, is right next to the top of the home page when you sign in. I'll show it to you. Very easy to find. You want to use some keywords and get in there and look for a title. You can search for people by job title, but I don't always recommend it. And that's because not everybody's good at putting their job title in a way that will help you find them. They may have it buried somewhere. So looking at particular companies or geographies that particular client's looking for, using whoever you find to send them a note through LinkedIn, or you can turn around and have this client say, you know what, I found, John Jones' name out here, and he's the customer service manager for Kraft Foods or whoever might be in your geography, and I really want to get the resume out to them. Look up the It's a good way to get out of the whole resume black hole. For someone who mentioned on here that you're looking for trucking companies and there were 18,000 profiles in this geographic area, that is definitely something where you want to narrow it by keyword. We'll talk about that here in a minute as well. There are settings that you can use for your profile that either make you easier or harder to find. I will show this to you when we're logged in here, looking at the settings, looking at whether or not you want everyone in the world, technically, to see when you've done something to your profile. If you're employed and you're looking, you probably don't need to have the boss say, Joe updated his headline today. You might want to turn that off. But if you're unemployed, it might not make any difference. You can let other people see your connections list. A lot of people try to hide this. There's really no good reason for that unless you're in sales and you don't want to share your contacts. For example, you can all see my contacts. You can definitely see who is in my network. That is a great way, again, to broadcast who knows you, your relationship to them, and it's giving people an idea of your professional span of influence. The photo, as I mentioned earlier, is a critical piece of LinkedIn. Get your photo in there. Absolutely. Don't worry about what it looks like. It's not that close up. Honestly, people who are worried about age bias, literally a box Clairol and a little airbrushing will do the trick. It is much more preferable to be known for either whatever ethnicity, believe it or not, that a person might be than it is to hide, definitely, and you will hear that from a lot of applicants as well. Promoting yourself on LinkedIn is really fun. Once you get into it and you start to use it, you will see from your home page that you can do what's called share and update. It's a little bit like Twitter. This is a feature that LinkedIn added about 16 months ago or so, and you can tie it to Twitter. However, you can give more information. It doesn't have to be Twitter-like. It doesn't have to be very, very brief. And it gives people a good idea of what you do professionally. The nice thing about these updates is, unlike Twitter, where if you issue out something that says, hey, I'm reading this great book on project management, reinforcing your brand message here, it doesn't go away. When people look at your profile later, they will see a scrolling list of your last, I believe it's 10 updates. So definitely you want to get in there and do that from time want to do for once in a while is take a look at these whole profile stats. We talked about this briefly, where you can see who has viewed your profile. You may find that, gosh, all you've got in there are coworkers. Time to broaden things a bit. Try to decide if maybe there's something in your profile that needs to be changed. One other good piece to LinkedIn is that there are global forums. They are divided into either a global, what's called answers, should be called Q&A, but it's just answers section, and that is broken out into different professional areas, and then there are forums within each group. Asking and answering questions will generate more PR for you than I could tell you, because everyone in the world looks at it. If you think they don't, you'll see your profile stats go through the roof after you've done it. If you do decide to ask or answer questions, you certainly want to make sure that what you have put on there is very well thought out. And again, nothing is confidential. Everything can be seen. The forums used to be closed information, and they're not anymore. All of this information is indexed by Google. And if that's not enough to scare you into being very professional on Google, then I don't know what would be. Much as looking for a job, although I have run some surveys lately and people have said, it would be kind of nice to have a very qualified applicant reach out to me on LinkedIn. So yes, it is possible. Just be careful with it, be professional with it. And we'll talk about that here when we go over Clay's profile here. So here is the example that, let's see, looking to see if we need to go offline to LinkedIn at this point. Yes, we do. So we need to have our share window up here. Sorry, I was a little slow on the draw there.
No problem. I'll get this up and ready for you.
Okay.
And I'm going
here,
to expand it.
We have Clay Stalter.
And before you get started,
sure.
Laura, everyone, if you'll notice on the share screen, you have a full screen button. And what that does is you click on it and you get to see it as a full screen within your webinar session. So this is an easier way for you to be able to see what she's doing. And then you can just click that same exact button to go back to the way you see the webinar now. So go ahead and try it out as she's doing this demo. Go ahead, Laura.
Sure. Now, here's where you're going to see the classic view that somebody has when they first log into LinkedIn. Right now, if you're not familiar with the site, it can look a little busy. What this is telling you on here is that there are, it's basically welcoming you, and it will say that no matter how you log in. This has an extra bar up here on the top that says, see who you already know on LinkedIn. That's something we're going to ignore for the moment because that's LinkedIn's way of asking you, would you like to put your email address book in do recommend doing. But we're going to talk a bit more about Clay's profile itself and some of what I would recommend in terms of how he can use LinkedIn to navigate and how he can reach out to contacts. Everybody sees the same home screen in LinkedIn when they first log in. It has network activity. Yes, this is not in English here, so that's not common, but you will definitely see that there are network updates from other people here. So, and I'm not sure if Clay is with us today on the webinar. I know he and I discussed this a bit on email. So one thing I'm going to go into here is you can always look at and either edit or view your own profile from the home page. A lot of different ways to view a profile. When someone looks for you, they will get a profile view. We're going to go into edit just for simplicity. And you'll see that Clay has a great picture in here. Definitely like his picture. It has some personality to it. It has some color to it. You can recognize about. Right now for him it's a student at University of Missouri Columbia. He has a geographic area filled in, which LinkedIn always asks you about, and then an industry. And nothing wrong with those. They're all as they should be. He has information in here on his work history. LinkedIn shows this brief little current past education summary, whatever you want to call it, for everybody. And you will see it if you surf around in here a lot, that it gives you this quick snapshot. So you can see where he's going to school, you can see connections, no recommendations yet. He can add other pieces of information, and we'll talk about this here briefly. He has put in some information in his summary, and this is the summary I talked about where you can get 2,000 characters in here, and unfortunately, you do not want to have a paragraph because your words get lost somewhere in the middle of it. So we'll walk through that here a bit as well. If you scroll down further, you see his work experience. For what a LinkedIn profile looks like for most people when they first get in. So I do have some recommendations here based on what he and I spoke about on email. And Clay, you definitely realize you can change this if there's something you want to change about it after the fact. Going into edit to just getting some of this basic information, obviously first and last name. I do not recommend getting creative with these, by the way. LinkedIn will boot you out based on its terms of service. He does have that he's a student, and I would say that that's definitely a key piece for him. It's definitely not the only piece of information I would use for him, and I do have a recommendation here that I will go ahead and put in for him. Again, realizing that he can definitely change this very easily. So based on some of the information he gave me, he is looking for what he would call loosely an online journalism type role. These basics, your country, your zip code, your industry. The industries list is very long. Again, different ways you can get in and manipulate this. He's fine. He's all set. So we're going to save this, and we're going to go back here and look at his headline. Now we have something a little longer. Talks about how he's at Columbia. He's a photographer. He's into online reporting. He is targeting, generally speaking, a photo editor type of job, which is actually not the only job he's targeting. By putting this in the headline, we are making it so that if someone is searching for a master's student right now at the U of Columbia and they're looking for someone that maybe is targeting a photo editor job and is in this particular geographic area, he has a really good chance of being found. Okay, so that's one point I wanted to make. One thing that he does not have in here is a current position, because as he's mentioned, a good indication of what he does, I would recommend adding something along these lines. We're trying to show the interest in photojournalism. We're realizing, again, this is going to be a great keyword for him. If we put in a couple of other keywords such as editor, online media, you know, we're and actually, I'm sorry, I've got this in the company name. I just want to have actually University of Columbia in here, so I will change this. Not that it's technically his job right now, but it is definitely an occupation loosely for him at the moment. So if we say that, you know, if he's a photographer or photography student, we could put perhaps some of the particular areas of study that he's finding to be of interest, you know, that kind of thing. And pretty much, you know, unless he's going to put in a description here that has some keywords or that type of thing, I would leave it alone. What will happen here, I'll just put in I currently work here, and it also has you want to take the default off of here. Update my headline, that's where LinkedIn. Let's see, I will put, I think it was 2009. Now, when you look at his snapshot, you see photography student, editor, digital media student at University of Columbia. Gives you a little bit more robust background. These, again, are keywords for him. If I'm looking for somebody that's a master's student, if I'm looking for somebody that's interested in digital media, I'm going to be able to find him a little easier. Okay. In terms of his education, one thing he can do, and he and I talked about this here briefly, he can go into the university piece on his education, and he can add that this is a master's program, but I'm not entirely clear of the degree, so I don't know that I would add this right now, but I would recommend it for him. One other piece that he actually has that he could be linking here is a website. He has a blog. He has examples of his work. If he decides to add these, he could simply go in here and put the URL of whatever portfolio he has of his photojournalism work and add it in here for someone to see. You know, again, it could be of interest to a potential employer. And again, when they Google him, they are definitely going to find this LinkedIn. You're seeing here in Google results, his LinkedIn profile is second. Huge piece of his digital identity. When you click on it, you're getting, again, the piece that we're updating here. So another reason to be very cognizant of what you're doing on LinkedIn. There are different pieces he can be changing in here. One thing that he could change, and this is not something I will do at the moment because it's really hard for him to change it back, but the public profile defaults to a name that has your name in it, and it has these nice garbage characters. And you can get in here and you can edit it, and you can give it another name. You can customize your public profile URL here, and you could tell it that on LinkedIn.com I am a photojournalist, for example. I have changed mine to my full name. It definitely comes up very highly in my results. as far as the fact that Clayton's got information here in the first person, those figures, again, really popping out. And talking a bit more in terms of what he says here that he's wanting to do. My interest in this, led me to leave the newspaper, etc.
And Laura, I just wanted to jump in for a second.
Yeah.
To give you a heads up so we can have a little bit of time for questions if people,
Sure.
so we don't run over.
Should be done with this here in just a second. His specialties, he can add many more keywords in here. They're going to be very findable, great place to search. So again, just these. One thing I did want to talk briefly about is how he can be searching for other people. He can be searching for groups. This drop-down that you always have at the top of LinkedIn, you want to go in there and search for things that would make sense in terms of what you're wanting to do with groups. He could be going in here and joining any of these, online reporters and editors, shows employers what he's interested in doing, and allows people, all 5,688 of them, to get a hold of him directly. So I do recommend that as well. For the advanced people search, which I did want to talk about here briefly, this is where you want to leave the drop down to people and go over here and say advanced. If we put in something like, Columbia, and we look at somebody who's maybe a features reporter or something like that, he may actually find that when he looks particular people that he could actually reach out to, ask them questions, send them a message. When they belong to a particular group, he may be able to message the person through the group, sending an in-mail or a group mail, and saying, I'd like to pick your brain. I'm a new graduate student. I'd like to get started in the industry. So let's see. Oh, we did want to talk about settings here real briefly. Settings are something you have to hover towards the top of the LinkedIn screen. Get in here. It will actually make you enter your password again, because if you had left your computer just sitting there, you don't want somebody else going into the passwords. If you can see here, you can turn on and off activities. Again, if you're conducting a confidential job search, that's critical. You can select what other people see when you look at their profile. LinkedIn makes it so that you have to leave your name and headline out there. If you do that, then at least you're able to see some of your what I would call your profile statistics out here. It's different for me. Emily looked at him, that kind of thing. This is really key to figuring out who might be looking to hire you, might be trying to form a relationship with you. And Clay, you can definitely change that setting back, but I honestly would recommend leaving it open. So we should be good to go back and start answering questions here.
And they are definitely already queuing up on that. I'm going to switch the view. You have your file share back on, and we have some polling questions going, and I'm going to set the floor to question mode. So what that means is the open floor request mode is *#, and you'll hear it.
The floor mode is on. To request the floor, enter
So for those of
then
you that
pound.
are on the phone lines and you want to ask questions, you can go ahead and do that. If not, go ahead and post it in the chat pod, and we'll get started on the webinar. So the first question is, there was a question about the videos, the digital videos that people are creating profiles with, and one of our participants wanted to know how exactly, how relevant is it? Is it something that you should do? And my recommendation was that
actually a subject that we could probably spend all day talking about as well. It's really going to depend upon the field you're in and whether or not that's helpful for you. Some executives use them. Some people who have a profile to present might use something like that. Honestly, I have never built a video resume. So I'm definitely not the expert on those.
Pam asks, what's the difference between a profile and a CV?
In terms of, is she asking about a LinkedIn profile or a resume profile?
I'm not quite sure, and Pam, you can go ahead and put that in there. And in the meanwhile, we'll ask David's question. He asked, could you speak to resume fonts? These samples all seem to be less than 12, a bit small for my eyes. How about length, and then how many employers talking about 1 to 2 page resumes and all of that?
Sure. In terms of fonts, most of these are rated about an 11. It depends upon the font itself and whether or not it's serif or sans serif and the width of it. One of the things you're seeing is that if the font is smaller, resumes are viewed electronically these days. They're going to be viewed in such a way that it doesn't present as much of a readability issue. 12-point font, I don't think I would ever use for anything that isn't a heading. And with this quantity of information, which as you can see, I dig a lot of information out of people, but there's no way we could put 12-point font on here and still have something that they could actually read with white space. White space is a lot more important than font size. In terms of whether or not it should be 1 or 2 pages, that is very dependent upon the actual work history. Right about the point in time in which you get more than those 8 years or so is a critical cutoff. It will differ substantially if someone's in more of a blue-collar field and or if their experience is just that much more cut and dried. Like, say, a nurse, for example, you may not find as much detail is required for that kind of a resume. You asked about a line after contact information stopping a scan. I actually looked into that, and there is no such thing that I've ever seen. If you're looking, lines are only looked at what I have seen. The ATS systems that look at lines as periods are very, very old. In fact, I had seen that in your previous webinar, and that is a first. I've never heard of that. The text versions are going to strip out the lines for you. If you get a chance to convert a document into text, you'll see that all the lines are gone.
That's a great question.
One thing that does stop an ATS system cold when you feed it in is a Word document with a lot of tables. If you feed tables in, it nests the information inside itself so that each of those is like a container, and it's tougher for that ATS system to read. But lines, every resume I create has lines, as you can see. So hopefully that answers that question. That was a new one on me. Never run into that as an issue.
And I've noticed, we're asking questions here with the polling pods. For those of you that are rating the webinar, we do have a poll here that talks about how informative it was or wasn't. And go ahead and let us know if there's something else that you would have wanted to hear about. Something else that you wanted to hear about, because I think that's very important.
Yes, these are definitely very, very wide subjects and definitely tough to cover in this short amount of time.
Are there any other questions? I checked the phone lines and nobody's in queue to talk.
Certainly when it comes to LinkedIn, if you're not familiar with using it, getting out there, doing some navigation, seeing whether or not there are people in your field that are using it, whether or not there are employers in particular fields, you're going to find practically everybody out on it.
Right, and we did, and Laura knows about this, so we did a whole series of webinars on social media, and you can go ahead and under the professional networking page on the portal on Illinois WorkNet, there's a whole breakdown with sheets on how to use LinkedIn, how to create a complete profile and all that if you want to have something, in hand. Some people need to go through stuff, and this is also going to be archived. So, but yeah, it's on the networking page, and I'll go ahead and just take this link and post it in the chat pod so people can see.
Sure, and I see a note in here about recommending LinkedIn for clients who are pursuing careers in education. I do recommend it because, again, you don't know who's hitting the net to look them up. And even if they have a great CV, CVs being, again, a little bit more cut and dried, the more information they can provide on LinkedIn, the better they're going to be, better off they're going to be, because someone can look them up and drill into their information in more than one spot. If there's any way to present a portfolio of work, you see that those links are available. Someone might have a great video of themselves teaching, for example.
That's a great suggestion.
You will find that highlight sections in those particular instances usually contain a lot of keywords, a lot of examples of projects that they might have worked on, what kind of knowledge they gained out of it. It's not going to be news to the employer that that person doesn't have a lot of work experience. So they're going to be more curious, what did you learn, exactly by trying to get launched in your field? Who have you learned from? Maybe even who's mentored you.
Actually, this is exactly what I'm adding here for Kate, who wrote in there that she's a recent graduate and she's just having a hard time getting started. And I think this is the name of the game for any recent graduate. And something that I've heard kind of pounded into everyone's head is just to really reach out, especially as Laura was talking about, doing your homework on these companies and following them and reaching out and saying, hey, I'm in this field looking to do ABC, and do you have any suggestions? And the best way to get hired is through the connections that you make. And maybe, Laura, you can add something to that.
Absolutely. LinkedIn, talking about what you know, what your interest is, and where you ultimately see yourself heading, that person can then be, kind of keeping that eye out for you. It's a great idea, too, to set up those informational interviews, to get out, either do it on LinkedIn, pick people's brains. How did you get started in your field? What would you recommend for me? You will find that, if there's a particular association you should be joining, or there's a certain type of event you should consider going to, those are the people that are going to let you know about it.
Absolutely, and it's also a great place to, create that list of your checklist, right? You go in and you do your homework on how many companies do this type of work, and then you identify people within those mentors that you want to reach out to. And more likely than not, if you send them a quick little email and say, hey, I'm really curious, I just got out of school, would you have any advice for a recent grad? I can't think of anybody that would really not want to at least shoot you an email and point you in some
to them and that kind of thing. You can get quite a bit of mileage out of that.
and I think some of it is just the process, and funneling down through all that stuff and figuring it out. We're about 5 minutes over, so I want to make sure that we're good on time. Let me check the phone lines. So I think we're good. We are continuing on. We can stay on for a little bit longer, for a minute or so as the questions kick in, but we do want to thank you, and more importantly, Laura, thank you for joining us on WorkNet. And we actually found Laura on LinkedIn, so this is our success story with our LinkedIn group and all the things we do with WorkNet and the portal, and so we highly recommend that you reach out to people just like we did. We found our expert and said she does a lot of great work, and we're very grateful to have her on. So thank you, Laura, for joining us, and now you get to learn a little bit more about WIA. So we get to have these different perspectives, and more importantly, thanks to all the participants that made it on today. So we'll have this webinar tomorrow as well.